flu is on the move. The virus has arrived in yet another province.
They're concerned about any health problem that's on the mainland. It's not going to stay there.
Showing the vaccine only thought to be 10% effective.
Nationwide, there are already more than 41,000 cases confirmed. Every state in the country reporting widespread flu activity.
As of this morning, 18 countries around the world have reported cases of the flu within their borders.
Numbers out of Australia as of mid-October are concerning. If you get sick, stay home.
Accessory to War, The Unspoken Alliance Between Astrophysics and the Military, by Neil deGrasse Tyson and Avis. It seems like Neil deGrasse Tyson is everywhere now. I see him more and more on talk shows. I think the most recent one I saw him on was Joe Rogan's show. And of course, I'm also a big fan of Audible. I've always enjoyed his shows, The Cosmos, but I'll admit this is the first book that I actually finished of his. I did also get his other recent book, Astrophysics for People in a Hurry, but I haven't read that one yet. It's in my queue. I'll get to it. I just so happen to get to this one first. Now, even though it's co-authored, there's very much his personality in the book. He always seemed very energetic in any interviews that I've seen, always kind of straying all over topic, and kind of for better and for worse, he kind of jumps around a little bit. He does that in interviews, and he kind of does that in this book too. He starts off talking about space and kind of how things are nowadays in terms of satellites and other advancements very early on in the book, but then he jumps back to the days before we had accurate maps. And so he jumps backwards and forward in time based on the different advancements made by people and the association with the military. And a lot of the stuff we take for granted nowadays, like maps, a simple road map is just at our fingertips. But back when people were just newly discovering all these different territories, crossing the Atlantic, which by the way, he really goes into detail about ships being lost, trying to find where they're going based on the stars, and the minds that came up with tracking all that, like how many of us actually look up and actually think that night sky you could find your way across the world just by looking up and seeing what stars are in the sky, what position they are, and finding your way just based on that information alone. So if you went back in time, you could literally just take over the world. If all you had was a map, basically just a big book, world atlas, and a compass, you could almost take over. Some of the early maps I actually looked up after finishing this book, and it's crazy how much they've changed over the years. Continents missing, the misshapen Americas. They didn't have a very good understanding of the world around them. So what kind of a person did it take to jump on these wooden ships and to sail into the unknown, crossing the Atlantic for the first time? What was going through the minds of the sailors, not knowing what they would find or how far they'd have to sail before reaching what they thought would be India? And as the title of the book kind of gives away, he goes into the military application of all these different technologies, that and then the telescope. And the telescope is kind of one of the constants in the book, where it starts off with just a simple little spyglass and all the different iterations out throughout history, the reaction by all the different kings that acquired it for reconnaissance, all the way up to the Hubble Space Telescope and the different types of telescopes, the different types of frequencies that they can measure, types of light, and not only that, what they can tell from it, all tied with military applications, spy satellites. And then once you have the information from your reconnaissance, how do you transfer it to the people who are making the decisions that need that information? So then you have telegraphs, to the telephone, and so on. All the while, the military there flipping the bill for the research and the development of these technologies. And it makes sense. The thing is you could almost apply that to just about any kind of technology that we have under the sun. Not just limited to things like telescopes and spy satellites and that, but you think of the Jeep. The Jeep was a military vehicle at one point, eventually retired. Now they got then they had the Humvee, then that was retired. Now they're on to other vehicles. All of which that technology has trickled down into other vehicles. The Jeep obviously being a very popular civilian vehicle now. Cell phones, the internet, and the list goes on and on. But to be fair, he does make mention of demilitarizing Germany and trying to describe what actually is a weapon. Where does that stop? Does it stop with the mess kits that soldiers carry? Because that can be used for personal use at home. So he does make mention of that. I just think it's interesting that he has a book dedicated entirely to that link between the two, the science and the military. But to be fair, people are always willing to pay when they can kill each other more efficiently. specifically governments. But it was still a good book. It very much has, like I said, his personality, very sporadic, kind of jumping around. And I guess one important thing for me is when they tell you about distant stars and what the atmospheres are like and the size, I always wondered how you could know that just from a telescope. And this book, I feel, does a good job of explaining it, even if it is just a little bit better understanding for me. I'm sure he's summarizing quite a bit of that, but I thought it was good all the same. What I think is funny is that I got this book on Audible, and what's funny about it is that the narrator they depict almost sounds just like Neil deGrasse Tyson. Now, he does a little intro, but he doesn't narrate the entire book. But they at least got a narrator that kind of sounds like him. A little bit of the mannerisms come across as the same. And like I said, I'm a huge fan of Audible, so I listen to all these books in my truck to and from work and at work typically. And if you like this book, another book that this kind of reminded me of just a little bit was The Dead Hand. The Dead Hand is more about the Cold War, different weapons used, and the research, which this book goes into the space race with development of rockets and ICBMs, which is nearly exactly the same as the rockets used for space missions. The only difference being astronauts and satellites versus nuclear warheads. Almost as if the entire space race was just a smokescreen for the development of these weapons of mass destruction. One thing the book did do for me was remind me just how bad my knowledge of world history really is. And because of that, I think I'm going to start doing something new on this channel. I'm going to start adding in, with all the other books that I do, some of the great courses, and try to start as far back in history as I can and see how far I can make it with the great courses, mixing in different books to get a real good, detailed, general knowledge of world history. So if you subscribe to the channel, check back. Periodically I'll mix those in, starting with this one I found, History of Ancient Egypt, narrated by Bob Breyer. Now, I'm a huge fan of the great courses. There have been a number of other ones that I've listened to. And since I have a minimum of 50 hours a week in the truck and at work listening to different books and programs, I think that might be a good thing to mix in, just because after listening to this book, and he goes back and forth from different points in history, different wars, I have a little bit background in history. I'm a fan of it, but it's obvious that I need more of an education. So in the coming weeks, look for that review. I'll post a link for all these below, all the books mentioned and the courses. As I said, I'm a fan of this book specifically. I've always loved his interviews. Too bad he doesn't do shows as small as mine, because I'd love to pick his brain. But oh well. Let me know what you guys thought of this book in the comments below, and I'll talk to you next time.